So the idea here behind DBT in general, it is a skill-based approach. Like the notion that Linehan was running with was that basically DBT recognizes that clients often end up in crisis and have problems in their lives because they lack skills to help them cope with life in an effective manner. It was the long and short of it. Like the idea behind this was that she was really trying to push away from this idea that folks were doing this out of malice or because they really wanted to hurt other people. If anything, one of the things that I've tried to encourage folks to do in their conceptualization of these things as they're working with clients is to not use the term manipulative. Because again, some of it's you're splitting hairs here in terms of how these things are defined. But at the end of the day, if I'm in my head conceptualizing something as manipulative, that puts a distance between me and the client that's not going to be super helpful. So try to keep that in mind as best you possibly can. So for that reason, DBT came up with this whole broad curriculum of skills. If I don't have it here on the slide, I think it's 23 sets of skills altogether that she's used. And one of the other things that she did or didn't do, which is what a lot of the folks behind the CBTs have done or not done, is it didn't put copyrights to any of these things, such that folks have taken these ideas and run with them in a lot of different directions, for better and for worse, such that the 23 sets of skills have gotten adaptive and reconfigured in all sorts of different trainings that I've seen over the years. And again, good things and bad things about that. I think it's good to disseminate this stuff more broadly. I think you do also have to be cautious about how intently folks are making the adaptations that they are. But again, try not to soapbox here. I think I already talked about the basic setup here, the way that the approach was to run. The reason that she taught the skills in the groups that she did was that it was pragmatism, basically. She didn't want to eat up a lot of time in individual sessions by spending effort into psychoeducation. Like, she wanted to do what she could to make sure that the time in therapy was time in therapy, that it wasn't time spent in a classroom setting or something like that. And if you, like I said, I think I had some overlap here. I'd already mentioned the newer edition of the text, but if you did want to see the skills in more drawn out fashion, her most recent edition has a pretty comprehensive curriculum. And I believe the most updated version of the diary card is in there as well. If you want to see some of the other basic stuff just connected to DBT, there is available through University of Washington. You can find the 2008 version of the diary card. It's available for free online. If you go to just Google and type in DBT diary card, it's usually the second or third thing that comes up. But you have tons of other options. I know Lane Peterson at PESI has done a lot of really comprehensive curriculum development over the years. There's a woman named Perpetua Kova, as a psychologist out somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, that has done some adaptations for kids. There have been some interesting developments with DBT here in the last couple of years. I think it is funny how these concepts and constructs sort of fade in and out of the public consciousness. DBT was a very big thing back in the early 2000s, and then I didn't hear much about it for a while. But just in the last couple of years, I think as more therapists have been coming up and been looking more for specific skills and ideas and concepts that they can sort of fit into their practice, DBT seems to be experiencing something of a resurgence. But again, to clarify, you have two options with this. You can certainly either do DBT the way that Linehan had outlined it, complete with a individual skills group, telephone consultation, and what have you, or the evidence suggests that you have the option of cherry picking specific ideas of DBT and incorporating those into your clinical practice. And again, some of the basics of DBT here per Dr. Linehan. It requires that you be part of a DBT consultation team, because again, if you're working with folks that specifically meet the criteria for borderline personality disorder, this is not a model that you should be running on your own. It's really best if you have some backup and support, if for no other reason than to make sure that you are able to access consultations as needed. It helps not only prevent therapist burnout, it also makes sure that we're remaining as true as we can to the DBT model. The coaching phone is a pretty integral part of this as well, but it's up to you in terms of how that would fit together. Most of the time when people attend a short seminar like that, I think the coaching phone stuff that I'm covering is just for historical context so that you understand how it works. But also clinicians should also have an ongoing mindfulness practice. And I think that's an important part to incorporate as well. Most of the time, when we're talking about mindfulness as it pertains to DBT, the idea behind it is it's not about trying to calm myself down. Mindfulness is sort of an in-the-moment skill that you can use in some cases, but it's also an overarching principle. Most of the time, when skills don't work, like one of the first things you ask folks is, were you mindful enough to try to incorporate this into your current whatever at that time? And if the answer is no, that's usually a pretty easy fix, and that mindfulness was the main concern here. But part and parcel to that, she had recommended that clinicians that were working with folks to incorporate mindfulness into their lives should probably incorporate mindfulness into their lives as well, both to practice what you preach and also to make sure that you're able to be more observant and careful about these types of things. The way mindfulness works in DBT, like I said, it's not about calming things down. If anything, it's about turning things up to 11, to reference Spinal Tap for whomever might enjoy that. But one quick other pop culture reference, there was a song by Tom Waits where he had this one lyric that goes, "I walk between the raindrops," which is a good articulation about like how mindfulness works within all of this. Like if I'm trying to walk between raindrops, I have to be really aware of everything that's going on inside of me and everything that's going on outside of me. I have to be very aware of everything that's going on inside of me so I can move my body in as deliberate a fashion as I possibly can. And I have to be very aware of everything that's going on outside of me so that I can really in my head see the individual placement of each raindrop such that I can navigate around them. Not that anybody could ever actually do that, but that's kind of what we're gunning for here. The idea behind mindfulness and all of this is that we're trying to slow down processes so that I can make better choices moving forward. Some basic assumptions here. I swear I'm just doing some table setting here just before I get into some of the meat of this. People are doing the best that they can and they actually want to improve. Despite the fact that people may not have caused their problems, they have to solve them anyway. That first one goes down okay. That I think most people can accept the idea that whatever the concern or distress that I'm attending to here, the reality is that I can find a way to recognize that I don't want to live like this anymore. If I'm living in distress on a near consistent basis, I don't want to keep doing that. So I can find ways to try to improve it. The second one, I think you have to be a little bit more cautious about how that's delivered. I think especially in the year 2024, that can have a pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of quality that I'm not as huge a fan of, and won't go over it quite so well with your clients either. But the reality is true. If like one of the things you might use distress tolerance for would be like fibromyalgia, right? Like that would be a good example. With fibromyalgia, it's a non-specific pain disorder that is really more or less resistant to treatment. To be in persistent pain with no explanation behind it, that's just not fair, and it's not right. It's not okay. It's a terrible thing for a person to have to contend with, and they still have to find a way to deal with it. And they still have to find a way to brush their teeth and pay their bills and make sure that the trains run on time, so to speak. Like there's not much that you can do to get away from the responsibilities of life, despite the fact that horrible things might have fallen upon you. But also everything is caused by something and everything exists in a sequence. Like one of the things that is important about distress tolerance is recognizing that there's a process to all of this that needs to be respected and attended to as best you possibly can. Ways I've described it sometimes in some of the longer form sessions about DBT is that like when I move my arm like this, like when I lift my arm up like that, God knows how many neurons are firing to facilitate that particular action. If I make the decision to, when I become upset, to scream at my partner, it's this times 1,000. Like there's a lot that needs to be unpacked in these particular moments that we can, use to understand better about how to integrate skills into the process. Very often, you'd find that when working with this population, a client comes in and we would ask them, "How have you been?" And they would say, "Oh, last night I got very upset and I went to the bathroom after an argument with my partner and I cut myself." That's a very abridged version of a much longer story. That a lot of what we're trying to attend to here is to recognize that there are sequences to this that need to be honored and understood. And ultimately, this is an important piece to recognize that figuring out and changing the causes of behaviors works better than just judging or blaming people for things, or judging and blaming the world for things, for sure.